Hello everyone, Pineapple and Apple here, and today we're jumping into episode 2 of Big Finish's 60th anniversary special, Once and Future, The Artist at the End of Time, by James Goss. This is probably, while not the one I was most excited for, one of the most talked about stories in the range. With the drama surrounding the cover prominent on social media such as Twitter, and the strange cast of characters, helped by this being one of the earliest reveals. The characters on the cover are the second incarnation of the Curator, Five and Jenny. Five's actor Peter Davidson being the father of Jenny's actress Georgia Tennant, who is happily married to David Tennant. So not only do we have a father and daughter playing this father-daughter duo, and not for the first time, but we also have Five's successor playing his incarnation of the Curator. And considering Colin will get a story as 6 later down the line, it's a little disappointing none of the Impressionists frontlined any stories. Sure, we'll get a fair bit of Stephen Noonan's First Doctor in a future story, but neither 1, 2, or 3 have their own dedicated stories in the way the others do. Not to mention how 8's story gets hijacked by many other Doctors. The second point of contention is that this lovely cover is not the first version, and while this one is great, it was a fixed job. The first being good, but not as good as it is from a glance. Looking at details like the Curator's tie and the background, it became clear that these were AI-generated elements. And the backlash got so large the Big Finish changed the cover to the much nicer one we have now. Just another point in the artist category against the AI. So, now we have the drama out of the way, let's jump into Once and Future, the artist at the end of time. We start the story at a place called the Final Gallery, the repository of remaining artwork at the end of the universe, as Five wanders in looking for the similar Time Lord DNA the monk recommended could stabilize him. As a GLaDOS-sounding guide, presumably played by Abby Harris, who's had an interesting career, seeks to show some lovely artwork, speaking about the collection with well-written dialogue, like a real know-it-all guide ready to get you buying tickets. The guide can't guide him toward Jenny, haha guide, but Five is quickly distracted by the degeneration, and then a painting showing a giant diamond in the stars, hinting at the explanation for the diamond motif among the artworks, as the guide continues to speak pretty nice dialogue, even as it pegs him as a poorer class customer, ushering him towards the close-by wing for cheaper paintings. That snarky bot. Presumably within said cheaper wing, Jenny is entertained by another guide, acting much like her father as she criticises the surrounding pieces.
Who's that?
Such a gift shop question.
Too kind.
The identity of the Wanderer is a secret among connoisseurs.
A mystery?
One that will be preserved until the universe's dying breath.
Nah. I think I'm going to solve it.
Five starts to notice many of the pieces have something in common, running off before he can come into contact with Jenny, who comes in immediately after he leaves. Christ, I hate when stories do that trope. But this is far from the worst egregious example of it. Similarly, it seems Five is now where Jenny was, not finding anything to his liking, but after deciding to seek out artwork held by private collectors, he quite literally wanders outside into a bank robbery to take a look and see if anything they stole was interesting, but ends up taking the fall for the robbery. All you would need to make that an opening to a generic Doctor Who story would be him looming over a dead body that everyone blames him for before he starts investigating. The robber tries to escape, but Jenny intercepts her. Meanwhile, Five tries to barter and actually manages to purchase an item, only for the seller to turn around once he leaves and immediately start business with Jenny. I swear to God, there is only so much of this I can take. We get a nice reference to the Braxiatel collection, the Doctor's brother's prized collection of artwork, and finally Jenny and Five run into each other, viewing some final artworks, and while not fantastic, their reunion/meeting is sweet. They notice the artist's signature in many of the artworks filled with classic Who references aplenty, but it stands out so much, being the seal of Rassilon. Their banter with each other and the irate art expert are quite fun, and like clockwork they run away after theorising that all the so-called final artworks are from the same place, and running away from the guards. So nice to have Jenny and Five be together. Their similar traits meaning that they can act together as a father and daughter is quite amusing, but fitting with their characters and dynamic all the same. Jenny apparently is at the end of the universe because she managed to bounce off of the Time War, and Five scolds her for throwing cash around to get some of the final arts. And it does have a nice double meaning whenever they refer to each other as father and daughter, always setting a nice grin upon my face. 5 seems pretty stable, only half explaining what's going on to Jenny, and they head to many different worlds, attempting to predict what final artwork may come next. And some nice little funny interactions, eventually landing at the Eye of Orion, well known in many stories as a place of rest and tranquility. The unique atmosphere helping 5 more. But they do manage to come across the Painter, even though there's no incoming extinction event they can find. But what they do find is a wet painting of the Doctor's favourite spot on the planet. And of course, it was him painting it, the second Curator, played by Colin Baker. The Curator laughs at 5's question.
I have lost myself. Do you know who I am?
Perhaps better than you do.
And is confirmed as the painter, who seeks to make art of dying worlds. And the gravitas in the Curator's weary soul at the end of the universe is an interesting angle for the performance. The second Curator doesn't have much screen time, just previously in Stranded 4, and I don't think he's my favourite of the two. But the way the story frames him is interesting enough to warrant his appearance. Strangely, they take a turn to skip stones, and the banter between the two Time Lords is pretty good. And the Curator explains that he makes these artworks of dying worlds to immortalise them, 5 even seemingly thinking he may be the one destroying them. But it's purely an altruistic endeavour. One that would make sense from a far older Doctor's perspective. The Curator then speaks with Jenny, another good interaction as the Curator views the Doctor from an outside perspective, while Jenny takes a more positive spin on the Doctor's ways, as the Curator seems resigned, also seeing himself in 5. It's a really interesting point of view. Surprising the Curator, the world starts ending, apparently thanks to his curse. So he sends Jenny to run away with 5 and says his goodbyes. The lake water starts building up as the planet goes to shit, and after some effort, they eventually make it back to the TARDIS. Rather abruptly, they're already on another world, no scene in the TARDIS between, so it just kind of happens. Apparently having enough time to make a boatload of sandwiches, but they appear on a snowy world seeking the artist out again. 5 a little pissed and still assuming the Curator is the one behind it. They head towards a nearby life sign, finding the Curator with his latest art, a snowman, or more appropriately, a sculpture, built with the abundance of snow on this never-inhabited world. The Curator laughs at 5's assertions, dropping more hints of his identity, and they draw more connections between these two, the Curator reiterating his motives, making sure that someone is there to say goodbye, and immortalise those places in art form. But every place he goes is destroyed once the art is done, calling it his curse. 5 is sure the planet is safe, but now puts the pieces together, taking the Curator along with them, seeing how far this curse will go, extending the TARDIS's shields to such a point that when they step outside he won't technically be landing anywhere. They find the snowman among the other final arts, much like the rest of his assumed destroyed works, meaning someone scooped them up as the planets died, really touching the Curator's heart, but he is a little miffed that his art is being sold. Perhaps proud of the large prices, but abhorred by the price being put on dead worlds, so to say. The Curator unplugs the snowman support system, letting it melt like the world it was made on. Which, sure, is a nice little bit of meaning, but I didn't really get anything out of it. I was just like, okay, and? You probably just cost someone $1 billion and ruined some artwork. Damn, this Curator guy kinda sucks. The trio travelled to a desolate, once war-torn world, and to test, the Curator makes a cup with some clay and war memorabilia, now waiting for the world to end. Whoever does this takes the artwork first, and then burns the world. The Curator calling for an audience, shouting at the invaders, but as the world starts blowing up, they take refuge. The Doctor calling one of them Scrappy Doo, which is just too cruel.
Wow, I haven't seen...
Look away, Daphne. We all promised each other that we would never speak of him. Not ever.
They speculate why the planets are being destroyed, and eventually Jenny hits the mark. If you destroy the planet, the art becomes final art, skyrocketing the price. At least, in retrospect, it makes the destruction of the snowman more poignant, but that scene on its own is still pretty strange. The Curator is angry, thinking it's a travesty, and 5 feels quite the same way, even as the Curator almost becomes nihilistic. 5 takes them to a large populated planet, sending the Curator outside, the Curator adamantly refusing to be the reason death comes to such a rich world. 5 making an interesting point when comparing the attitude to the Time Lords of old, but eventually they get him out the doors, and everything's fine, so long as he doesn't make anything, the creations being what the opponent targets. The world is so whimsical that we even get the sounds of children playing, but when the Curator lets his bleeding heart loose, he comes close to fixing a child's broken spinning top. Shocked as, for all they know, that could have summoned the Planet Destroyer. The Curator refusing to live this way, so with a decent score, they head back out and land back in the final gallery, where the Curator is introduced to the artgoers, his fans. The Curator goes on a great rant that even as the universe ends, all these rich people still put their items above life. The Curator arguing with the Torbot. It's a really good message, and Colin's performance at this point kind of manages to overshadow the other main characters, as he argues with the robot, who seems to admit the final gallery has been the one destroying the planets to skyrocket the value. The final gallery is reinforced, ready to be the last thing in the universe, maybe even the first occupants of the next. But the Curator decides to prove to the robo-guide he is the artist, and he starts to draw, bringing what we hear described as basically a big harvester ship, which now seeks to take the new art and exterminate the rest of the gallery. A wonderful example of turning the enemy on itself. The Curator stays within, going a little mad, while 5 and Jenny try to save everyone else. But she makes a good point, sending 5 back in to stop the Curator's little Time Lord victorious moment.
The Curator's going too far.
Yeah, isn't he? And what are you going to do about it?
Well,
Go on. What would the Doctor do?
why do you have to be so right all the time?
It's my curse.
The robo-guide gets a nice little bit of dialogue with the Curator. It's actually quite sweet. 5 comes back and realizes that the Harvester is destroying the final gallery to place his drawing within the final gallery. And he chastises the Curator for mourning these worlds instead of saving what remains. The gallery is eventually destroyed by the machine, the robo-guide along with it, but the Curator and 5 manage a narrow escape, mourning the loss of the art, albeit from different perspectives. The Curator even tossing one on their way out. He gets a nice ending where he despairs on what happened to his paintings, but assures Jenny one day the Doctor will value her as his greatest creation. And they find the Curator's first painting, sharing a nice little scene.
I wanted something to survive of that world. My world.
Those 3 men standing in the middle of a battle.
Always fighting. Against the dark.
What is it?
Have you ever been to Gallifrey?
No.
Oh, it doesn't matter now. But I wanted it to be remembered. And now it is. By one person at least. And I'm pleased that's you.
And it turns out this painting is Gallifrey Falls No More, which is a nice little detail, not only for his character, but as a reference. The interactions between the two have some good moments, where he can tell her the future Doctor's feelings from his past, but I do wish a little more could have been done with them. Meanwhile, the Doctor destabilizes, flitting between incarnations once again, waking up as the Curator starts another painting, saying that he now might go back to what he's better at, curating, or universe saving, whichever. So, with a nice little scene, 5 says goodbye to them, Jenny actually wanting to come with him, but the Doctor leaves her as he seeks out the diamond among the stars he saw at the start. The goodbye could have been better, but as it is, it's still pretty good, both from the performance and the dialogue. The Curator leaves his finished painting, wondering if someone else might find it, and they swan off to help save those in need. The story ends proper with 5 forgetting the adventure, but attempting to focus on finding the diamond. After a bit of fighting with himself, 7 finally stabilizes as him and the TARDIS are taken out of time for the next story. So that was The Artist at the End of Time, and while not perfect, all 3 main actors were great in performance, and while I feel 5 could have got more to do as his specific incarnation, maybe some more emotive moments with Jenny, as I said the performances were still good. That also applies to Jenny, but she does seem to work off of the Curator better at some moments, as this story on a character level is actually more focused on the Curator, finding his way to being more like the Doctor again. it's actually a nice little character arc for a character we see so little of. The Curator is despairing at all the death and destruction, so he creates and immortalizes these dying worlds, only for capitalism and the 1% to still ruin everything. And the way he sends their own weapon back at the gallery was quite clever. His interactions with Jenny, him able to understand and communicate his feelings from his future point of view, such as when he calls her his greatest creation, are not only good from a Doctor to Jenny level, but with the added information that Curator is a future Doctor. And of course, we don't know how the Doctor will turn into the Curator, by regeneration or some other bi-generation type MacGuffin. He is a future Doctor in every way that matters. So it gives what he says a kind of older, reflective, and whimsical tone that somehow makes you believe him more than a younger incarnation saying it. There isn't a real villain per se, but the commentary is nice and does really well to mix with the emotional stakes and exploration of the story. So, although it has shortcomings, I think I'll give Once and Future Part 2, The Artist at the End of Time by James Goss, a 7 out of 10. Matching it to the first story, both quite solid, but not amazing. Thank you everybody so much for watching my review of Once and Future Part 2. Please like the video if you liked it, comment down below if you wish, tell me if there's something you want me to watch or another Big Finish audio you'd like me to talk about, and consider subscribing to the channel, and if you do, ring the notification bell so that you're told every single time that I make an upload. Once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next review. Bye!
Toast. A little piece of toast. Because there's so much to choose from. There's brown bread, white bread, all sorts of wholemeal bread. It comes in funny packages with writing on the side.